They say history is written by the victors, but some victories are too dark to write down at all. This is one of those stories. A story buried in classified files, locked behind steel doors in places that don't exist on any map. A story about what happens when you try to build the perfect weapon and forget that weapons can think for themselves. It was the winter of 1943, and the war was eating young men alive. Europe was a graveyard. The Pacific was hell painted on water. Every week, telegrams arrived on doorsteps across America, each one carrying the same 4 words no mother wanted to read. The War Department was running out of soldiers, out of hope, out of time. And desperate times have a way of making good men do terrible things. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, hidden beneath a facade of a munitions factory, something else was being built. Project Vanguard. The name sounded noble enough, but nobility has a way of rotting when you bury it underground. The scientists wore white coats and American flag pins on their lapels. They spoke about duty, about sacrifice, about giving our boys an edge. But what they were really talking about was playing God. Dr. Samuel Hartwell ran the operation. Harvard educated, brilliant mind, haunted eyes. He'd lost his son at Normandy before Normandy even had a name, before history would immortalize that beach in blood. They told him his work could save thousands of other sons. They told him he was a patriot. They told him whatever he needed to hear to keep him working through the night, injecting serums into young men who'd volunteered for something they couldn't possibly understand. The volunteers came from everywhere. Farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, kids who'd washed out of basic training due to injuries but still wanted to serve. They signed papers they weren't allowed to read. They said goodbye to families who'd never know where they went. And they walked down those concrete stairs into the mountain, into rooms that smelled of antiseptic and ambition, where machines hummed with a sound like distant screaming. His name was Thomas Kane, 22 years old, red hair, freckles across his nose like stars. He'd grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania, where everyone knew everyone, where the church bells rang every Sunday, where life moved slow and steady like the creek behind his parents' house. He had a girl waiting for him, Sarah, with a smile that could stop time. He carried her picture in his wallet, pressed against his heart. He'd promised her he'd come home. He'd promised. The procedure took 17 hours. Hartwell stood behind the glass, watching, taking notes with hands that no longer shook because he'd trained himself not to feel anymore. They pumped Kane full of chemicals that had names like poetry and effects like violence. Adrenaline compounds synthesized from animal glands, bone density enhancers derived from minerals no textbook mentioned, neural stimulants that rewired the brain's capacity for pain, for fear, for mercy. They were building something beyond human. They just didn't stop to ask if beyond human meant still human at all. Kane screamed for the first 6 hours. Then he went silent. That silence was worse. When he opened his eyes 3 days later, they weren't the same eyes that had closed. Something looked back at the doctors that made them step away from the bed, hands instinctively moving to weapons they weren't carrying. Kane sat up slowly, and the restraints that had been designed to hold down a thrashing patient snapped like paper. He looked at his hands, turning them over, studying them like they belonged to someone else. Maybe they did. The tests began immediately. Strength, speed, endurance, pain tolerance. Kane could lift a jeep over his head. He could run 40 miles an hour without breaking stride. He could take a bullet to the shoulder and keep advancing, his body sealing the wound almost as fast as it opened. The brass came down from Washington to watch. Generals with chests full of metal stood in that observation room and smiled like wolves. They saw the end of the war. They saw American supremacy forever. They saw everything except what was happening behind Kane's eyes. Hartwell saw it, though. In the quiet moments between tests, he'd watch Kane sitting alone in his cell, staring at that photograph of Sarah, and Hartwell would see something breaking that no serum could fix. The other scientists celebrated. They prepared to scale up production, to create a whole division of super soldiers, but Hartwell started having nightmares about what they'd actually created. He started wondering if the real monsters weren't the ones we were fighting overseas. 3 months into the program, Kane passed every test, every single one. He could kill a man with his bare hands in seconds. He could survive in sub-zero temperatures wearing nothing but standard fatigues. He could go a week without sleep and still maintain perfect combat efficiency. On paper, he was the perfect weapon. But weapons aren't supposed to weep in the middle of the night when they think no one's listening. They gave him his first mission on a Tuesday, a German U-boat base in occupied Norway. Intelligence said it was heavily fortified, impossible to assault through conventional means. Kane would parachute in alone, neutralize the entire base, and extract before dawn. Simple, clean, impossible for anyone else. Routine for him. Hartwell went to see him the night before the deployment. Found Kane sitting on his bunk, still holding that photograph. The cell was sparse. Concrete walls, single light bulb, no windows. They'd built him a cage and called it quarters. "You don't have to do this," Hartwell said quietly, his first honest words in months. Kane looked up at him with those strange new eyes. "Yes, I do, sir. It's what I was made for." "You were made for more than killing, son." "Was I?" Kane's voice was soft, almost gentle. That scared Hartwell more than any rage would have. "I can barely remember what I was before. Sometimes I look at Sarah's picture and I can't remember the sound of her laugh. Can't remember what it felt like to be tired or scared or normal. You took that from me. You and your serums and your patriotic speeches. You made me into something that doesn't get to be human anymore." Hartwell had no answer. What answer could there be? Kane deployed at 0300 hours. They dropped him 12 miles from target over frozen Norwegian wilderness. Radio contact was crisp and clear. He moved through the darkness like death's own shadow, invisible, unstoppable, alone. The reports came back in real time. Base perimeter breached, guards neutralized, demolitions set, objective complete. A perfect mission, a perfect weapon, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Then the radio went silent. They waited for extraction confirmation. It never came. Search teams found the U-boat base destroyed exactly as planned, but Kane was gone.
The manhunt began at dawn, but you can't hunt what's hunting itself. Kane had vanished into the Norwegian mountains like smoke, and every attempt to track him ended in failure. The War Department sealed the files. Project Vanguard became a ghost story whispered in classified briefings. And Dr. Samuel Hartwell started drinking to forget the thing he could never forget. The look in Thomas Kane's eyes the night before he disappeared into the darkness and never came back. But Kane hadn't died. Death would have been simpler, kinder even. He'd done something worse. He'd started remembering what it meant to be human, and that memory burned hotter than any serum in his veins. For 6 months, reports filtered through intelligence channels, unconfirmed sightings across occupied Europe, a German supply convoy ambushed outside Prague, every soldier dead, no shots fired. An SS officer found hanging from a bridge in Poland, the word murderer carved into the stone beside him. A Gestapo headquarters in France, reduced to rubble, with only one set of footprints leading away. The patterns were unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Cain wasn't following orders anymore. He was following something else, something that might have been conscience, or might have been vengeance, or might have been the last desperate attempt of a dying soul to prove it had ever been human at all. The OSS tried to make contact. They dropped messages in the places he struck, codes only he would recognize, promises of extraction and forgiveness. Cain never responded. He'd become a legend in the occupied territories. Civilians called him the ghost soldier. The resistance called him an angel. The Nazis called him a demon. Nobody called him by his name anymore, because the man who'd been Thomas Cain from Pennsylvania had died on an operating table in a mountain, and what walked in his place was something without a name, something made of rage and regret and chemicals that wouldn't let him rest. Hartwell couldn't let it go. While other scientists moved on to new projects, new ways to win the war, he obsessed over Cain's file, studied every report, plotted every sighting on maps that covered his office walls like accusations. His colleagues said he'd gone mad with guilt. Maybe they were right, but guilt has a way of seeing things that sanity misses. In the spring of 1944, Hartwell found the pattern. Cain wasn't striking randomly. Every target had something in common. Prison camps, execution sites, places where innocent people were being murdered by the thousands. Cain wasn't fighting the war America had sent him to fight. He was fighting a different war, one that didn't appear in any general's strategic plans. He was trying to save people, trying to prove that the weapon they'd made him into could still choose mercy. Hartwell made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He requested field deployment, pulled every favor he had left, convinced the brass that he could bring Cain in, that he understood him better than anyone. They gave him 2 weeks and a small team. What they didn't give him was the truth about what they'd really do if he succeeded. Some orders are better left unread. They found Cain in a burned-out village somewhere in eastern France. The SS had been there 3 days earlier. The evidence of what they'd done still hung in the air like a prayer that had gone unanswered. Cain was sitting among the ruins, surrounded by graves he dug with his bare hands, 37 of them, one for every civilian who'd been too slow to run. He looked up when Hartwell approached, and the doctor saw something in those eyes he hadn't expected to see again. Tears. "I tried to get here sooner," Cain said. His voice was rough, broken. "I'm faster than any man alive, and I was still too late. What good is all this strength if I can't save them? What was the point of turning me into this if I still can't stop the dying?" Hartwell sat down beside him in the ash and the silence. 2 men who'd both lost something they could never get back. "There was no point, son. That's what I came to tell you. What we did to you, it was wrong. Not just the science, but the whole damn idea. We were so focused on winning the war that we forgot what we were supposed to be fighting for." "I remember her laugh now," Cain said quietly, pulling out that photograph, worn thin from a year of being held by hands that could crush steel. "Sarah's. It came back to me last week, high and clear like bells, and I remembered Sunday dinners at my parents' table and the smell of cut grass in summer. All these normal things I thought the serums had burned away. They're still there, buried under everything you put inside me, but still there, still human. Then come home, please. Let me help you. We can find a way to reverse the process, to give you back your life." Cain smiled, and it was the saddest smile Hartwell had ever seen. "You know that's not true, Doc. You know what's waiting for me back there. More tests, more missions, or a bullet in the back of the head if I refuse. I became a weapon, and weapons don't get to retire. They just get used until they break. I won't let that happen. You couldn't stop it the first time. What makes you think you can stop it now? The truth of that hung between them like smoke. In the distance, artillery rumbled. The war ground on, indifferent to two men sitting in the ruins of their choices. I need you to do something for me, Cain said finally. When this is over, when the war ends and everyone goes home, I need you to find Sarah. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I kept my promise the only way I could. Tell her the boy she loved didn't die in some lab. He's been fighting this whole time to stay alive, to stay human, to matter for something more than killing. You tell her yourself. Come back with me, please. Cain stood up, and even after everything, Hartwell felt that instinctive fear at seeing what they'd created rise to its full height. I can't, Doc. There are more camps out there, more places where people are dying because everyone's too busy fighting the big war to notice the small murders. Maybe I can't win. Maybe I can't save them all, but I can try. That's all I've got left, the choice to try. They'll kill you. Sooner or later, you'll run into something even you can't survive. I know. Cain smiled again, and this time there was something like peace in it. But at least I'll die as Thomas Cain, not as a weapon, not as a ghost, as a man who chose what his life meant, even if that life wasn't supposed to be his anymore. He walked away, into the morning light, and Hartwell let him go. Let him disappear into the war and the wilderness and the myths that would grow around him. The reports kept coming for another 8 months. Then, on a cold morning in December 1944, they stopped. The ghost soldier was gone. Whether dead or hiding or transformed into something entirely else, no one ever knew. Hartwell went back to America and burned every file he could find on Project Vanguard, destroyed his research, testified before a closed congressional committee about the dangers of trying to build better humans. They didn't listen. They never listen. But he'd made his choice, just like Cain had made his. He found Sarah 2 years after the war ended. She'd married a local teacher and had a baby girl with red hair and freckles like stars. Hartwell told her that Thomas had died a hero, fighting behind enemy lines, thinking of her until the end. It was true enough. Some lies are kinder than truth. She cried, but she smiled too. She always knew he'd keep his promise. He was that kind of man. Yes, Hartwell thought. Yes, he was. And we tried to take that away from him, tried to make him into something else. But humanity isn't something you can extract with a needle or enhance with a serum. It's a choice you make every day, in every action, in every moment, when you decide what kind of person you want to be. Thomas Cain made his choice. In the end, that's the only part of the story that matters, the only part worth remembering, the only part that makes the darkness bearable. They say history is written by the victors, but some victories are too important to be written at all. Some heroes are too true to fit in any official record, and some weapons, when given the chance,